She's laughing with a whiteboard clear, unpacking a fresh pack of pens, never willing to accept of fear. She's loved in many channels, every gauge and on nights and black blue lights. Heaven help them when she recites. Mysterious life, girl got skills. She moves in space with minimum waste and maximum joy. Makeshift desk and a cat that bites. When you see her coming, take your pills. No place for snowflakes or sensitive hearts. When sentiment is left to chance, she'll send you back to your start. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switches to crumpet, bends them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. Verse by verse, exploring the text. She reads and recites, not knowing the tongue, learning every step of the way. Melts all your memories and feeds you facts. Her zeal is like fire, but her heart is of gold. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switch to crumpet, bans them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. Smooth moderator. 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 Ooh, moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator.
Hello, good evening and welcome. Whoever's in the live chat, whoever's lurking, loving, hating, whatever, to this Thursday evening's exploration. So tonight, 18th of June 2026, I've begun this at 8:30 p.m. GMT for anyone in a different time zone. That's where it is here. And I'm going to run this one tonight alone again because there's something that I just want to read through. It's a PDF on something, well, on tonight's topic, which of course I'm yet to announce. So without further ado, tonight's topic is stereotypical thinking. What do we really know? So yeah, this will be the fourth live stream where I'm exploring that one topic about stereotypical thinking. We've done a lot of discussing what our understanding of it is, whether it was myself, Ravioli, Nagar, Banksy, also known as Hafez TV. We've gave our understanding, we've listened to a brief understanding in a video, I think, and we've looked through basic information on it. And we explored, I think it was the last time, the time before that, we engaged in a little activity where we developed a character based on what our minds brought forward about an item. So what our minds have calculated a person is typically like who owns a certain item, just because that's the only information that the brain's got, right? And that is basically what I understand stereotypical thinking to be, right? It's a conclusion that the brain has come to based on whatever information it's got in there. And it's up to us how we manage our stereotypical thinking. Anyway, that's the basics thus far. So tonight, I want to go to a PDF that I've found, which I'll put the link in the description of this live so that you can go and download that yourself. I've downloaded the PDF from this website here that you see on the screen. Is that saving? I've just put it in the description. I'm not sure if that's saving or not. I think it is. Yes, it has saved in the description under this live stream. So you can go and download that PDF and check it out for yourself if you do so wish. So yeah, you download it from that page, which I have done. And when it's downloaded as a PDF, it begins like this. So it's SAGE reference, the SAGE Handbook of Social Psychology, Concise Student Edition. And this paper is Stereotyping and Impression Formation, How Categorical Thinking Shapes Person Perception. So the contributors are Kimberly A. Quinn, C. Neil McRae, and Galen V. Bodenhausen. Sounds German or something like that, Germanic to me. Edited by Michael A. Hogg and Joel Cooper. Book title, The Sage Handbook of Social Psychology, Concise Student Edition. Chapter title, Stereotyping and Impression Formation, How Categorical Thinking Shapes Person Perception. Published date 2007, access date September 2nd, 2016. Publishing company, Sage Publications Limited, City, London. There's its print ISBN, it's online ISBN. What's this? DOI. When you click on that, I don't know what that means. See what that brings up. I'm waiting for it to load. It's the Sage reference. That's what that is. Okay. So don't even look at that. And this is pages, print pages 68 to 92, is it? Right, so there we go. So this PDF has been generated from Sage Knowledge. Please note that the pagination of the online version will vary from the pagination of the print book. Okay. Right, so let's get to start reading on this anyway. Stereotyping and impression formation, how categorical thinking shapes person perception. Kimberly A. Quinn, C. Neil McRae, Galen V. Bodenhausen. Introduction. To engage in successful social interaction, we must form impressions that capture other people's characteristics coherently and meaningfully. What is perhaps most remarkable about this process is the ease with which it is accomplished. Impressions often spring to mind so readily that they seem to directly reflect the immediately obvious objective characteristics of the target person without any active intentional construction or bias on our part. In reality, however, research on impression formation has revealed a complex series of mental processes, most notably stereotyping, that are involved in construing the character of others and the meaning of their behavior. Okay, so this is going to be looking specifically at the processes, I do hope, of what occurs in the brain, at least in 2016 or 2007, when this was actually published. So that means that there'll be newer papers on this. All right, let's go with this one. In everyday life, we are repeatedly confronted with people with whom we must interact. In order to accomplish this goal, however, we must form an impression that captures the other person's characteristics in a coherent and meaningful manner. What is perhaps most remarkable about this process of impression formation is the ease and rapidity with which it is accomplished. Impressions often spring to mind so readily that it seems as though they directly reflect the immediately obvious objective characteristics of the target person, without any active inferential construction or the impression on our part. In reality, research on impression formation has revealed a complex series of mental processes that are involved in construing the character of others and the meaning of their behavior. Impression formation begins with the observation of a target person by the social perceiver. This observation leads to the identification and categorization of the target's characterization or inference about, I've missed a bit. I'll start again. This observation leads to the identification and categorization of the target's behavior. Through a process of attribution, this behavioral categorization leads to a characterization or inference about the actor, and these inferences may or may not be moderated by a process of correction in which the perceiver considers other, perhaps situational, factors that might have produced the behavior. Through a process of integration, the various inferences that are drawn about the behavior are combined into a coherent, organized impression of the target. Consider for a moment what kind of impression you may form of the first author's great aunt. She is an elderly woman, short, somewhat overweight, with stooped posture. She walks with a cane, wears thick-rimmed black glasses, and is soft-spoken. She never married, has no children, and has no family in the community in which she lives. She has very little money. Knowing all of this, you would probably expect her to be lonely and unhappy. As it turns out, however, Aunt Gertrude is a very caring, understanding individual who always appears to be satisfied. But how can this be? A brief interaction with Aunt Gertrude may be sufficient to resolve this puzzle. Aunt Gertrude is a Catholic nun who has devoted her life to charity. The immediate visual evidence provided by her nun's habit is all that it would take to enable you to make sense of her various attributes and to form a coherent impression of her. But the story is more complex. Aunt Gertrude loves romance novels, even the very sexy ones, the ones with cover illustrations of handsome men, shirtless and flexing under the adoring gaze of semi-clad women. She absolutely devours them, the novels, that is. How, then, can this revealing bit of information be reconciled with your impression of sweet, chaste, elderly Sister Gertrude? Stereotypes and efficient person perception. Even simple examples, such as the case of Aunt Gertrude, underscore the complexity of the task facing social perceivers in considering the overwhelming amount of evidence that is available in our complex world. In recognition of this complexity, recent approaches to impression formation have converged on a set of working assumptions, the most basic of which is that perceivers prefer simple, well-structured impressions. Bodenhausen and McRae, 1994. and that they achieve this coherence by regularly constructing and using categorical representations, such as stereotypes, in their attempts to understand others. By construing others not in terms of their unique constellations of attributes and inclinations, but rather on the basis of the social categories to which they belong, such as race, age, sex, or occupation, perceivers can make use of the wealth of related stereotype-based material that resides in long-term memory. As Gilbert and Hickson, 1991, 509, have noted, the ability to understand new and unique individuals in terms of old and general beliefs is among the handiest tools in the social perceiver's kit. Just take some water. A wealth of research has documented that when a particular categorization is made and associated stereotypes are activated, they influence impressions both directly and indirectly. The direct influences come from the activation of stereotypic beliefs themselves, which may be added or averaged into one's general impression of the target. More interesting, however, are the indirect effects that emerge when activated stereotypic concepts influence the selection and interpretation of other available information. Stereotypes appear to direct attention and influence which information gets encoded and how information is interpreted, such that people often notice instances that confirm their existing stereotype-based beliefs. Bodenhausen, 1988, Chapman and Chapman, 1967, 1969, Higgins and Barr, 1987, Rothbard et al., 1979. Interpret ambiguous information as confirming their stereotypes, Darley and Gross, 1983, Duncan, 1976, Jacobs and Eccles, 1992, Jones, 1990, and actively seek information that confirms their view of others, Snyder and Swan, 1978. The guiding assumption of contemporary models of impression formation, then, is that whenever we encounter someone and categorize him or her as a member of a particular group, stereotypes about this group will exert an influence on the interpretive processes involved in forming an impression of the person. Bodenhausen and McCrae, 1998, Bodenhausen et al., 1997, Brewer, 1988, 1996, Fisker and Newberg, 1990, Hamilton et al., 1990, McCrae and Bodenhausen, 2000. This categorical thinking is assumed to shape person perception in at least two important ways. Categorical thinking enables perceivers, first, to use the activated knowledge structure to guide the processing, for example, encoding or representation, of any target-related information that is encountered, and second, to rely on the contents of the activated knowledge structure, for example, trait and behavioral expectancies, to derive evaluations and impressions of a target. Thus, at the categorization stage, stereotypes are assumed to be activated along with trait representations and situational scripts, enabling assimilative effects on attention and encoding. At the categorization stage, stereotypes are assumed to influence comprehension of the target's actions, producing assimilative influences on behavioral interpretation and inference generation, and permitting the selective processing of expectancy-consistent information. At the correction stage, it is assumed that social perceivers may attempt to take into account how stereotypes might be biasing their overall impressions. At each of these stages, stereotypes can have both facilitative and inhibitory influences on information processing, alternately enhancing or diminishing the stereotypicality of the system's outputs. Bodenhausen and McCrae, 1998. Categorization processes in impression formation, stereotype activation. Central to several influential models of person perception is the notion that the stereotypes associated with social categories are automatically activated in the mere presence of a triggering stimulus. For example, Brewer, 1988, Fisker and Newberg, 1990. The origins of this notion can be traced to Allport's 1954 seminal writings on the nature of prejudice. The message that Allport forwarded was straightforward and powerful. To simplify the demands of daily interaction, mere exposure of a stimulus target is sufficient to stimulate categorical thinking and promote the emergence of its associated judgmental, memorial, and behavioral products, that is, stereotyped reactions. According to this account, then, categorical thinking is an unavoidable aspect of the person perception process. Allport's ideas have enjoyed a revival in recent decades, prompted largely by a landmark paper by Devine, 1989. Devine proposed that racial stereotypes are indeed activated automatically upon detection of a person's group membership. She argued that because people are inevitably exposed to the cultural transmission of stereotypical ideas during childhood socialization, social category membership comes to be inextricably associated with stereotypical notions that spring to mind without any conscious intention on the part of the perceiver. Supporting this reasoning was work reported by Dovidio et al., 1986. In their research, they presented participants with a categorical label, such as black or white, followed by a series of adjectives, such as musical or metallic, that were either stereotypical or non-stereotypical with respect to the presented category label. Participants' task was simply to report, as quickly as possible, whether each item could ever be true of the primed category. As expected, participants responded more rapidly when stereotypic rather than non-stereotypical items following the priming label, suggesting that this categorical representation of the group was activated during the task. Nonetheless, because the participants' attention was directed toward the category label, this early demonstration failed to provide unequivocal evidence of automatic stereotype activation. However, in a series of more controlled tests of the automatic activation hypothesis, Devine 1989 demonstrated that even pre-conscious presentation of racial material was sufficient to prompt the activation of stereotypical concepts. After exposure to pre-conscious primes pertaining to the category African American, participants later judged an ambiguous target person in a decidedly stereotypical way. In more recent research, pre-conscious cues have also been shown to precipitate stereotype activation on the domains of sex, age, and occupation. Bach, 1999. Following these initial demonstrations, an abundance of experiments emerged in which researchers measured the accessibility of categorical contents, that is, stereotypic traits, after the presentation of priming stimuli, usually, though not always, verbal labels such as Asian. These subsequent investigations employed a variety of semantic priming techniques that attempted to obscure or conceal the relationship between the experimental primes and target stimuli. The logic of these studies is straightforward. If perceivers are unable to avoid stereotype activation when the triggering stimuli lie outside awareness or are seemingly irrelevant to the task at hand, then evidence of stereotype activation would corroborate the viewpoint that stereotype activation is unconditionally automatic. As it turns out, the available evidence tends to support this view. Bach, 1990. Conditional automaticity in categorization and stereotype activation. But does this really signal that stereotype activation is unconditionally automatic in the sense proposed by Allport, 1954? The answer to this question remained unclear for at least two reasons. First, many of the social stereotypes that had attracted empirical attention were those linked to group memberships that could be discerned from a rudimentary visual appraisal of stimulus target, sex, ethnicity, and age group. It seemed quite reasonable that perceivers might automatically categorize others into groups on the basis of these readily discernible visual cues. Indeed, they have often been referred to as the Big Three in stereotyping, Fisk 1998, and research on the white male norm hypothesis and related effects does provide evidence that race and sex categorizations occur quickly and effortlessly. For example, Stroessner 1996, Zarate and Smith 1990. Nonetheless, it was less clear whether categorizations based on less rudimentary clues would also elicit mental activation of the stereotypes associated with the group in question. It was also unclear whether stereotypes were activated automatically by the strict definition of automaticity as involuntary, unintentional, effortless, and unconscious, Bach 1989. In fact, under empirical scrutiny, most mental operations fail to satisfy the multiple criteria required to specify a process as exclusively automatic in nature. Bach 1990, 1994, 1997, Kahneman and Treisman 1994, Logan and Cowan 1984. Even prototypic examples of automatic mental processes fail in this respect. As Logan, 1989-70, has remarked, automatic reactions can be modulated by attention and intention. They can be inhibited and suppressed, and they can be coherent and planful. Given this state of affairs, a revised conception of automaticity has emerged in recent years, a conception that emphasizes not the unitary nature of the concept, but rather the extent to which its various components, that is, awareness, intention, efficiency, and control, are independently implicated in the execution of specific mental operations. The possibility that stereotype activation is conditionally rather than unconditionally automatic has attracted considerable empirical attention in recent years and has engendered heated theoretical debate. Backed by a revised conception of automaticity, researchers have challenged the assumption that stereotypical representations are activated automatically in the presence of a stimulus target. As Bach 19914 has argued, as with all pre-conscious processes, what determines whether the stereotype becomes automatically activated is whether it has been frequently and consistently active in the past in the presence of relevant social group features. Thus, if there is meaningful variation in the frequency and consistency of people's exposure to stereotypes, there may also be variation in the automatic component of stereotype activation as well. Indeed, this is precisely the message that is beginning to emerge in the literature on the subject. So before I go any further, this at the very least suggests what I've been saying about our brain takes in so much information and comes to a conclusion based on that information, which of course is always subject to change, because although it's developed, the brain's developed a conclusion, the brain also continues to take in more information. So that conclusion can be changed in the future. It's not set in stone. All right, so I'll continue. In one of the earliest challenges to Devine's 1989 argument, Lepore and Brown 1997 demonstrated that people high and low in prejudice respond similarly if stereotypes are activated, but that they respond differently to category activation. Although high and low prejudice participants demonstrated equivalent knowledge of the Black stereotype and responded to stereotype activation with similarly negative impressions of the target individual, These similarities were not replicated when participants were primed subliminally with the category black. Following priming of the category label, high prejudice people exhibited the same negative impression of the target relative to a controlled condition. Low prejudice people did not, suggesting that priming black failed to lead to the activation of the black stereotype. See also Kawakami et al. 1998, Lepore and Brown 2002, Locke et al. 1994, Moskowitz et al. 1999. More recently, Livingston and Brewer 2002 reported evidence to suggest that even the presentation of black faces, which are presumably more meaningfully linked to the black stereotype than is the label black, do not lead inevitably to activation of the black stereotype. Indeed, a host of variables have been shown to moderate the supposedly automatic nature of stereotype activation. Many of these variables reside within the social perceiver, influencing both the motivation and the ability to override stereotypical responding. Other variables, however, reside outside the perceiver, in the contextual constraints that make stereotypical information more or less relevant to the task at hand. For a review, see Blair 2002. Okay, I'd like to take this. I was going to say a break. How about we get through these two paragraphs and then we stop for a break? Cognitive moderators of stereotypical activation. In addition to evidence that prejudice level may moderate the automaticity of stereotype activation, other research has suggested that stereotype activation may also be constrained by a number of cognitive or capacity-related factors. One such factor is the perceiver's level of attentional resources. Most notably, Gilbert and Hickson, 1991, reported evidence to suggest that stereotype activation may not occur when perceivers are resource depleted. In their experiments, participants viewed a video depicting an Asian woman turning over a series of cards on which word fragments were written. The participants' task was simply to complete each word fragment with the first word that came to mind. The results demonstrated that participants did indeed tend to choose stereotypical word completions for the fragments, for example, rice rather than mice for ice, but only when they had sufficient attentional resources available to do so. Gilbert and Hickson concluded that stereotype activation is only conditionally automatic, in that its occurrence depends on the availability of attentional resources. Physiological processes may also moderate stereotype activation through their impact on arousal level and resultant information processing resources. For example, McRae et al. 2002a. See also Johnston et al. 2003 and 2005. Recently provided evidence of hormonal influences on social cognitive functioning, from evidence that women are more attracted to facial symmetry and masculinity during ovulation. McRae et al. Reasoned that women should similarly be sensitive to category level, that is, stereotypical, information during periods of high conception risk because of the relevance of this information to potential reproductive success. Indeed, they demonstrated that during high conception risk, women categorized male faces more quickly than they categorized female faces, demonstrating hormonally moderated categorization, and classified male stereotypical words more quickly than counter-stereotypical words, demonstrating hormonally moderated stereotype activation. Motivational moderators of stereotype activation. Other research has suggested that stereotype activation may also be constrained by motivational concerns. For example, Blair et al. 2004, Hugenberg and Bodenhausen 2004 Richardson and Trawalter, 2005. Several researchers have sought to demonstrate that perceivers as immediate processing goals may be a more potent determinant of stereotype activation than the availability of attentional resources per se. Spencer et al. 1998, for example, have proposed that sufficiently motivated perceivers might be able to activate social stereotypes even under conditions of resource depletion. That is, they have demonstrated that even resource-depleted perceivers are capable of activating stereotypes if such activation can enhance their feelings of self-worth. Participants who received negative feedback responded more quickly to words denoting evaluator relevant stereotypes than did participants who did not receive negative feedback, even when they were cognitively busy. Further evidence for goal-directed stereotype activation can be found in a study by Pendry and McRae, 1996, who demonstrated that the extent of stereotype activation is moderated by perceivers' level of involvement with the target. When relatively uninvolving processing objectives are in place, for example, estimating a target's height, stereotype activation typically occurs at the broadest, that is, superordinate, level of categorization. However, when complex interactional goals are operating, for example, accountability and outcome dependence, a target is categorized both in terms of a higher order representation, for example, woman, and a more differentiated category subtype, for example, businesswoman. Stereotype activation thus appears to be goal-dependent, with its occurrence contingent on the interplay of both cognitive and motivational forces. Perceiver goals may also determine the nature of the processing undertaken when a target is encountered, with implications for categorization and thus stereotype activation. McRae et al., 1997b, see also Wheeler and Fisk, 2005, demonstrated that the encoding operation that is undertaken when a person is encountered is a critical determinant of stereotype activation. Specifically, only the semantic appraisal of a person prompts the relevant categorical knowledge structures. Pre-semantic processing orientations, for example, perceptual goals, are not sufficient to elicit stereotype activation. Thus, participants who judged the animacy of visual targets determined the presence or absence of a white dot on those targets, or simply reported the detection of the targets were all equally accurate in a subsequent face recognition task. Nonetheless, only participants who made the semantic, that is, animate to inanimate, judgments displayed stereotype activation. And on that note, definitely on that note, we're going to stop for a break.
Exploring consciousness. What does it mean? Looking up definitions, watching narratives fall apart at the seams. From the realm of the dead, stumbling through fractured reality. Truth is Dopamine hits, thinking slow and fast. Watch a narrative fall apart at the seams. Waking up, waking up. Watch a narrative fall apart at the seams. Waking up, waking up, waking up.
Right, I think I'm back because the music I was trying to play there does not seem to be playing. That's the end of that then. Switch it off. Oh, yeah, stop. It stopped. Awesome. Okay, so we're back to it. I hope I haven't bored anyone to tears. But I want to get through this paper. It helps me to read through things a number of times. So if I can read through this here, process it, and then go back to it at a later date, look into it in more detail, and then do a bit of research and bring that to the conversation when we explore this topic again in the future. So, yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for your support and listening along. We'll go back to the article, the PDF, I should say. It is a paper, and there we've got it back. So, we're now looking at the next part, which is contextual moderators of stereotype activation. Stereotype activation is not moderated solely by the contents of the perceiver's mind. Contextual factors also play a role in determining whether stereotypes are activated in the presence of social category members. For example, Castelli et al., 2004, Plant et al., 2005, Schaller et al., 2003. In particular, the situational context in which category members are encountered provides important input to the categorization process, as was demonstrated recently by Wittenbrink et al. 2001, Experiment 2. They used a sequential priming paradigm following Fazio et al. 1995, in which participants responded to black and white face primes that were accompanied by positive or negative background scenes, a church interior or a street corner, respectively. The results indicated that in the negative context, black face primes produced disproportionality facilitated responses to negative items, particularly negative stereotypic items. In the positive context, however, there was no evidence of a prejudiced valence bias, suggesting that activation of the negative black stereotype was attenuated by its presentation in a negative stereotype incongruent context. Work by Kurzban et al. 2001 also supports the role of contextual information in determining stereotype activation. Kurzban et al. Sought to challenge race as one of the big three in social categorization, Fisker 1998, and to demonstrate that the propensity of social perceivers to categorize according to race is a byproduct as the tendency for race and coalitional friend/enemy status to be correlated. Kurzban et al. Employed the category confusion paradigm, Taylor et al. 1979, asking participants to form impressions of a series of individuals through a set of materials, pairing faces of black and white individuals with opinions ostensibly expressed by the individuals. In one experiment, the expressed opinions provided cues to coalitions and suggested two allegiances within the set of individuals. In a surprise recall test, participants continued to make more within-race errors than between-race errors, demonstrating a lack of differentiation among blacks and suggesting categorization on the basis of race. However, the same participants also exhibited category confusions on the basis of coalition, albeit less strongly. In a follow-up experiment, physical cues to allegiance were added to the verbal cues. In this case, there was a reversal in the importance of race versus coalition categorization, such that race confusions decreased dramatically and coalition confusions increased just as dramatically. In another examination of how factors outside the perceiver affect stereotype activation, McRae et al. 2002b adopted a functionalist approach and speculated that the direction of the target's eye gaze would moderate stereotype activation. They reasoned that eye gaze acted as a cue through which perceivers could assess the relevance of the target, such that eye gaze directed toward the perceiver would be particularly relevant and would impel the perceiver to discern the intentions of the target. Importantly, assessing these intentions would be facilitated to the extent that any relevant information could be accessed, and categorical, that is, stereotypical, information could provide intention-relevant information. Indeed, their research demonstrated that gender categorization was faster for direct gaze faces than for faces with averted gaze or faces with closed eyes. Furthermore, lexical decisions were faster when gender stereotypical words were preceded by direct gaze faces than by laterally averted faces or faces with closed eyes, suggesting that gaze direction moderates both person categorization and stereotype activation. Other evidence also supports the role of target characteristics. For example, Blair et al. 2002-2004, Hugenberg and Bodenhausen 2004, Locke et al. 2005, Maddox 2004, Maddox and Gray 2002. Categorization and stereotype activation. The case of multiply categorizable targets. But what of social categorization in the real world, where category labels are not provided by an experimenter or where the target's identity reflects multiple category memberships upon encountering an individual? Perceivers must make their own categorization, a categorization that can take many forms depending on the behaviors or features to which the social perceiver attends. Stereotypes will not influence thought or action if they are not activated, and they will not be activated if the target's membership in a stereotyped group is not detected, as may be the case when the target belongs to several groups, for example, gender, ethnic, occupational, and so on. How does the mind deal with the problem of multiple category memberships? One possibility is that the target will be classified in all possible ways and that each of the applicable stereotypes will be activated simultaneously. Perhaps then all of the stereotypes that happen to be associated with those various categorizations will be activated. And from this assortment of associations, the perceiver will attempt to produce a meaningful, coherent, and well-structured impression of the target. One recent model, Kunda and Thagard, 1996, suggests that these disparate categorizations, and indeed anything else that is known about the target, that is, individuating information, will be activated simultaneously and will mutually constrain each other's meanings, eventually converging on a summary impression that can best accommodate the various elements composing one's knowledge of the target. When perceivers encounter a multiply a multiply categorizable target, all applicable categories are believed to be activated in parallel, and a competition for mental dominance then ensues. Contextual salience, for example, Bienat and Vesio, 1993, chronic and temporary category accessibility, for example, Smith et al., 1996, comparative and normative fit, Oakes et al., 1991, and temporary goal states, example, Pendry and McRae, 1996, are all factors that are likely to confer an activation advantage to particular categories in such a competition. This task could be daunting and counterproductive. However, almost inevitably, some elements of the available information will work against these goals of simplicity and coherence, either by conflicting with other information, for example, the nun known to have taken the vow of chastity, but who was observed to spend many hours reading racy romance novels, or by distracting the perceiver from whatever dominant themes might emerge in her impressions. For example, the nun who displayed behaviors consistent with kindness and charity, but who was also seen to perform an interpretive belly dance. In light of this, recent approaches assume that the process of information selection in impression formation involves not only the facilitation of some information, but also the inhibition of interfering or irrelevant information. In this variation of the parallel constraint satisfaction view, mutual constraint refers not only to the contextualization of an attribute's meaning, given other known attributes, but also, under some circumstances, to the active inhibition of some attributes by others. That is, category selection is assumed to be facilitated through the implementation of basic inhibitory processes, such that potentially distracting categorizations are removing from the cognitive landscape through a process of spreading inhibition. The result is an impression that is coherent and straightforward, undiluted by distracting and complicating elements. Evidence for inhibitory processes in stereotype activation comes from McRae et al., 1995. See also Dunn and Spellman, 2003. The studies involved the video presentation of an Asian woman who could be categorized in two salient ways, that is, on the basis of sex or ethnicity. In one study, prior to viewing the video and judging its edit quality, participants underwent a parafoveal priming manipulation in which either the category woman, the category Chinese, or no category was activated. After viewing the video, participants performed an allegedly unrelated lexical decision task in which the critical trials included words that were stereotypical of either women or Asians. With the control condition as a baseline, the data showed evidence for both activation of the prime. Have I read that right? With the control condition as a baseline, the data showed evidence of both activation of the primed stereotype and inhibition of the non-primed stereotype. When the category woman had been primed, participants were both significantly faster to verify stereotypical associates of woman and significantly slower to verify stereotypical associates of Asian than controls. Conversely, when the category Chinese had been primed, participants were both significantly faster to verify stereotypic associates of Chinese and significantly slower to verify stereotypical associates of woman than controls. This basic pattern was replicated in a second experiment in which the salience of the particular categorization was manipulated with contextual cues rather than the parafoveal priming manipulation. For evidence against category dominance, see Stroessner, 1996, Weeks and Lupfer, 2004. Interestingly, perceivers as motivational states also seem to play an influential role in the active inhibition of competing social categories. For example, Kunde et al., 2002. In a provocative demonstration, Sinclair and Kunde, 1999, see also Kunde and Sinclair, 1999, demonstrated that after participants received favorable feedback from a Black doctor, associates of the category Black became significantly less accessible, while associates of the category doctor became significantly more accessible. In other words, when motivated to view the Black doctor as competent, participants inhibited the category Black and activated the category doctor. They did just the reverse, however, when the Black doctor provided negative feedback, and they were thus motivated to view him unfavorably, activating the category Black and inhibiting the category doctor. Interestingly, a final experiment demonstrated that the tendency to inhibit the Black stereotype following positive feedback was present only among high prejudice participants, who presumably had more reason than low prejudice participants to avoid thinking positively of Blacks. Motivational factors, therefore, appear to be as important in the inhibition as in the activation of stereotypes. Categorization processes in impression formation, stereotype application. Given the challenges of monitoring a multiplicity of information in the social environment, perceivers may need to be selective in allocating attention. In addition to the problem of allocating limited attentional resources to the range of environmental stimuli available, either in the context or in the multiply categorizable target herself, perceivers are also confronted with the task of disambiguating the stimuli to which they attend. Human behavior is often complex and ambiguous, and therefore open to multiple plausible interpretations. Stereotypical expectancies provide one way of selecting among competing interpretations and, in so doing, have a number of intriguing effects. Not surprisingly, when all one knows about an individual is that he or she belongs to a particular social category, the stereotype associated with that category can determine the perceiver's impression of that individual. Thus, a person described only by a male name may, when no other information is available, be viewed as more likely than a person described only by a female name to be categorized by a host of traits associated with masculinity. Heilman, 1984, Loxley et al., 1980. Students described by only their academic majors may be expected to behave differently in ways that are consistent with the stereotypes about their majors. Nisbet et al., 1981. Blacks portrayed only in photographs may be viewed as more superstitious, lazy, emotional, untidy, and immoral than whites portrayed in photographs. Secord et al., 1956. Stereotypes also appear to influence the perceiver's interpretation of behavior. For example, Cameron and Trope, 2004, Jones and Kaplan, 2003, Mars et al., 2005, Otaki et al., 2005. When a person known to belong to a particular social category performs an ambiguous behavior, the stereotype associated with that category influences the apparent meaning of the behavior. Thus, a shove may be viewed as more violent when performed by a Black individual than by a white individual. Duncan, 1976. Cigar and Schofield, 1980. A mixed performance on an academic test may be considered better when performed by a child of a higher rather than lower socioeconomic background. Darley and Gross, 1983. And the behavior hit someone who annoyed him or her may be interpreted as punched an adult when performed by a construction worker, but as spanked a child when performed by a housewife. Kunda and Sherman Williams, 1993. More recently, D'Agostino, 2000, demonstrated that exposure to ambiguous sentences such as "some felt that the politician's statements were untrue" led participants later to manifest stereotypical, for example, politician lied, than non-stereotypical, politician erred, recall errors, suggesting that stereotypes had influenced the construal of the behaviors. Stereotypes also influence the meaning that a perceiver assigns to a particular trait. When a trait is used to describe a member of a stereotyped group, its meaning can be influenced by the group's stereotype. That is, the same trait can imply different behaviors when implied. Let's start this sentence again. That is, the same trait can imply different behaviors when applied to members of different groups. Kunda et al., 1995, found that perceivers rated lawyers and construction workers as equally aggressive, but nevertheless held very different expectations about their likely aggressive behaviors. Lawyers were viewed as more likely to argue and complain and less likely to punch and yell insults than were construction workers. Several studies suggest that the assimilative effects of stereotyping extend even to situations in which apparently irrelevant information is available to supplement category membership information. For example, Hilton and Fine, 1989, Kruger and Rothbart, 1988, Loxley et al., 1980, Raskinsky et al., 1985. Darley and Gross, 1983, for example, demonstrated that a child was viewed as possessing better liberal arts skills, cognitive ability, and emotional maturity when she was viewed on a brief video in a context implying high, rather than low, socioeconomic background. Without the video evidence, however, these differential evaluations of the child did not emerge. Thus, ample evidence has accrued to demonstrate the effects of stereotypes on social judgment. For example, Biernot et al., 1991, Duncan, 1976, Kunda and Sherman Williams, 1993, Sagar and Schofield, 1980, Vallone et al., 1985. Similar outcomes have been observed in the context of jury decision-making. For example, Bodenhausen and Weyer, 1985, and job applicant evaluation studies, for example, Heilman, 1984. As in the case of stereotype activation, stereotype application effects are moderated by a host of cognitive variables. Some conditions that exacerbate the impact of stereotypical knowledge on judgment and memory include mental busyness. For example, McRae et al., 1993, Pendry and McRae, 1994, task complexity, for example, Bodenhaus and Lichtenstein, 1987, information overload, for example, Prato and Bach, 1991, Rothbart et al., 1978, time pressure, for example, Roglansky and Freund, 1983, and low levels of circadian arousal, Bodenhausen, 1990. And at this point, I'd like to take another break because I need to get myself a bit more water. So we shall listen to a song that I hope will play this time.
Listen, is it true? Is it real? You see, people believe in karma, but I see a load of bitter revenge. People manipulating, making things happen. Listen, in the end, no one heals. There mindset, believing in punishment, unaffordable rehabilitation. You see, people don't wanna hear about inclusion, at least not until they're faced with exclusion. Listen, in the end, no one heals. They're hooked on revenge. Listen, is it true? Is it real? 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 Listen, is it true? Is it real?
There we are. Welcome back. Just managed to get a bit more water. So we can continue for possibly another 20 minutes with this PDF, and obviously it's linked in the description of this live. And if we don't finish it, that's fine. We can go back to this another time. It's not a problem at all. So get this article back. There it is. Right. Yes. So affect and stereotype application. In general, the cognitive moderators just discussed appear to confer greater importance to the activated stereotypical concepts in social judgment by undermining more evidence-based processing of the stimulus field. The impact of stereotypes on judgment and memory is also exacerbated by certain emotional states. For a review, see Bodenhausen et al. 2001. Initially, this work focused on valence-based mood effects in which the focal comparisons were on the differential effects of negative versus neutral versus positive affective states. An implicit assumption of this approach was the notion that different types of affect within a particular balance, for example, anger, sadness, and fear, produce functionally equivalent effects. Intuitively, one might expect to find that negative moods of any sort would be likely to promote greater use of negative stereotypes, whereas positive moods would have the opposite tendency. These common sense intuitions, however, have proved to be incorrect. In general, positive moods appear to increase reliance on heuristics and generic knowledge structures. For example, Bless et al., 1996a. Eason and Daudman, 1984. Eason and Means, 1983. Ortaki et al., 1997. Schwartz et al., 1991. Worth and McKee, 1987. In contrast, sadness seemed to be associated with the avoidance or minimization of the use of heuristics, schemas, and other simplified processing strategies. For example, Bless et al., 1990, Weary and Gannon, 1996. These findings clearly imply that happiness will likely be associated with greater reliance on stereotypes, whereas sadness may be associated with reduced reliance on them. Much evidence supports this expectation. In general, category information has been found to exert a stronger effect on the judgments of happy than sad or neutral perceivers in several studies. For example, Abele et al., 1998, Bless et al., 1996c, Blessum et al., 1998. Bodenhausen et al., 1994a, reported several experiments in which individuals in a positive mood were more likely than their neutral mood counterparts to judge individual targets in ways that were stereotypic of their social groups. Park and Banerjee, 2000, showed that happy people are less likely to discriminate accurately among different members of a stereotyped group. Instead, they tend to set a lower threshold for drawing stereotypical conclusions and hence are more likely to remember incorrectly that specific group members possess stereotypical traits. The fact that positive moods can increase perceivers' reliance on simplistic social stereotypes seems fairly counterintuitive. Closer examination of the relationship between happiness and stereotyping, however, has provided some insight into these findings. Schwartz, 1990, and Schwartz and Bless, 1991, proposed that happy moods signal that everything is fine and that there is little need for careful analysis of the environment. Consequently, happy perceivers may generally prefer to conserve their mental resources rather than engaging in systematic thinking. This line of argument gains some support from evidence that the superficial forms of thinking observed among happy people can be readily eliminated when the situation provides other bases for effortful processing, such as relevance to personal outcomes. Forgas, 1989, accountability to a third party, Bodenhausen et al., 1994a, or task demands, Martin et al., 1993. Relatedly, Bless and colleagues, Bless and Fiedler, 1995, Bless et al., 1996a, 1996b, 1996c, suggested that happy perceivers are often content to rely on their general knowledge and to use it as a basis for constructive elaboration, Fiedler et al., 1991, but that they are reluctant to do so if it proves to be inadequate to make sense of the target. For example, when the available individuating information is unambiguously counter-stereotypical, Bless et al., 1996c. Greater stereotype application under conditions of positive effect has thus been attributed to distraction, a general lack of epistemic motivation, and a generally greater confidence in generic knowledge structures. Happy people are generally neither unwilling nor unable to engage in systematic thinking. Rather, happy people appear to be flexible in their information processing strategies. Although often content to rely on efficient, simplified bases for judgment, such as stereotypes, they are quite capable of engaging in more detail-oriented processing if personally involved or otherwise motivated for more systematic thinking, or if simplified processing fails to provide a satisfactory basis for judgment. With respect to sadness, there is less evidence, but the available studies are generally consistent with the idea that sad perceivers do not rely on generic knowledge. For example, Edwards and Weary, 1993. Bodenhausen et al., 1994a, for example, demonstrated that sad participants did not differ from neutral participants in their tendency to rely on stereotypes. Park and Banerjee, 2000, found that sad participants were similar to neutral mood participants in their sensitivity in distinguishing among category members, and that they set a more stringent threshold for drawing stereotypic conclusions than did neutral mood controls. Complementing their functional analysis of happy moods, Schwartz 1990 and Schwartz and Bless 1991 argued that sad moods suggest to perceivers that their environment is problematic and thereby promote more detail-oriented, careful thinking. Research by Lambert et al., 1997, shows that the fact that sad perceivers are less likely to rely on stereotypes is attributable to their tendency to engage in stereotype correction. Drawing on Schwartz's 1990 analysis, Lambert et al. Argued that sadness should induce perceivers to scrutinize the use of stereotypes in the judgment process. Specifically, they assumed that sad perceivers should use stereotypes only in cases in which their use seemed appropriate to the judgment. They found, for example, that sad perceivers were more likely than controls to correct for negative but not positive stereotypes. Presumably, positive stereotypes were not considered an inappropriate basis for judgment. This kind of finding is consistent with the general idea that sad perceivers are likely to be careful, systematic thinkers. For example, Schwartz, 1990, Weary, 1990, applying stereotypes only when it seems appropriate to do so. Otherwise, they seem to take pains to avoid letting such biases influence their judgments. Importantly, the effects for sadness do not generalize to other negative moods. Compared to neutral mood controls, heightened stereotyping has been observed among both angry, Bodenhausen et al., 1994a, Keltner et al., 1993, and anxious, Barron et al., 1992, Raghunathan and Pham, 1999, individuals, presumably because the accompanying arousal levels interfere with processing capacity. In addition to the role of cognitive and affective moderators of stereotype application, a variety of motivational states also seem to be important. It is fairly well established that epistemic motivation undermines the use of stereotypes, holding perceivers accountable for their judgments, for example, Bodenhausen et al., 1994a, placing perceivers in a position of independence with, or dependence on, the target, for example, Fisker and Desprez, 1996, and making the judgment personally relevant or important to the perceiver, for example, Kruglanski and Freund, 1983. Also motivate perceivers to invest more effort in the judgmental process and lead to less stereotypical judgments. Causal uncertainty appears to have similar effects, Weary et al., 2001, as does experiencing a loss of control, Pittman and D'Agostino, 1989, and holding non-prejudiced attitudes, Wire, 2004. In contrast, Other motivational states, such as prescriptive norms, Gill, 2004, prejudice, Hugenberg and Bodenhausen, 2003, Kawakami et al., 2002, and the need for ego defense serve to enhance the use of stereotypes in judgment. Sinclair and Kunda, 2000, for example, demonstrated that participants viewed women as less competent than men after receiving negative but not positive evaluations from them, suggesting that participants' motivation to protect their self-views led them to use an available stereotype that they would not have used in the absence of this motivation. For similar arguments, see also Fine and Spencer, 1997. Spencer et al., 1998. Social judgeability concerns also moderate stereotype application. Unless perceivers believe there is a legitimate informational basis for a stereotypical judgment, whether or not such a basis exists, they are unlikely to report category-based, that is, stereotypic, assessments. When the only information that is available to perceivers is the target's category membership, or when the additional non-categorical information is deemed irrelevant to the judgment, perceivers are reluctant to rely on stereotypes. When additional pseudo-relevant or subjectively individuating information is available, however, perceivers do allow stereotypic information to contribute to their judgments. Thus, perceivers render more stereotypical judgments only to the extent that their stereotypes are not perceived as being the main source of information for the judgments, and to the extent that they feel entitled to judge the target. For example, Easerbite et al., 1994, 1997, 1998. Finally, implicit theories of personality influence stereotype application. People who hold an entity theory of human nature and believe that traits are fixed and enduring are more likely to render stereotypical judgments than are people who hold an incremental theory and believe that traits are malleable. Levi and Dweck, 1999, Levi et al., 1998, see Bastian and Haslam, 2006, for an alternative perspective. Theories about particular stereotypes also have implications for the construal of social information. In 3 studies, Wittenbrink et al., 1997, see also Wittenbrink et al., 1998, demonstrated that specific causal assumptions about the underlying socioeconomic disadvantage among African Americans, as either personal or structural, influenced participants' construal of causality in a situation that involved a Black target, and that interfering with participants' ability to integrate the available information into a coherent representation on encoding reduced substantially the stereotyping effects. In a trial simulation, ascriptions of personal rather than structural causality of Black disadvantage led to more guilty verdicts, longer sentencing recommendations, and more stereotypical trait ratings of the Black defendant, but only when participants were able to integrate the presented information. Right. I'm gonna stop now because I've only got 6 minutes left, and I think it would take more than 6 minutes to read the next paragraph. So we got to the end of page 13 out of 38. We didn't do too badly, actually, within less than an hour and a half if you include the breaks. I'll take that off screen. So I'm going to play a couple of songs to lead us out. To be ending stream, I'm going to thank everyone who's subscribed, who's liked, who's commented, who's just sat and listened in, supported, lurked, whatever juice of done. Thank you for being here and becoming an explorer with me on this fine Thursday evening. Good night and God bless.
There's a hustle and a bustle. It's been hustling and a bustling a while, a long, long while. This town is now a city. It's a city on a town. It's concrete over beauty. How that came to be. Lights go out, but it's wide awake. I can feel it breathing. The city with a purpose, anticipating until I sleep. It can feel me breathing. It knows I'm listening. It's been hustling and a bustling a while, a long, long while. I don't like the circus, never been, never will. The city with a purpose. The city with a purpose. The city with a purpose. She's laughing with a whiteboard clear, unpacking a fresh pack of pens, never willing to accept of fear. She's loved in many channels, every gay chant on nights and black blue lights. Heaven help them when she recites. Mysterious life, girl got skills. She moves in space with minimum waste and maximum joy. Makeshift desks and a cat that bites.